Evan thought a quiet trip to the countryside would clear his head, but from the moment he stepped off the bus onto that deserted road, the land seemed wrong, like it had been waiting for him, and it had no plans to let him leave. The bus ride felt endless, and the farther we drove, the more the world outside seemed to lose color. Buildings gave way to endless stretches of flat, pale fields, dotted with dead trees that leaned as though they'd been standing for centuries. The sky hung low and heavy, smothering the light until the day looked like early evening. I had imagined this trip so differently. I thought I would feel excitement, freedom, maybe even a sense of adventure. Instead, I felt an odd weight in my chest, like I was traveling towards something I hadn't agreed to. The road was almost empty. Once in a while an old pickup truck would pass by, but I never saw another bus. No taxis, no motorcycles, just long stretches of nothing. Even the few houses we passed looked abandoned, with boarded-up windows and weeds climbing their walls. The bus driver didn't speak the entire time, not even when he stopped briefly at a dusty corner store halfway through the journey. He didn't call for a break, didn't ask if I wanted to get off. I stayed in my seat, staring out at the lifeless land, noticing how quickly the clouds moved, like the wind up there was rushing somewhere far faster than we were. Hours later, I saw no sign of a terminal. There was no platform, no small building, not even a bench. The driver slowed down near a cracked road and simply stopped. He didn't look at me, didn't say a word, just pointed toward the narrow path lined by towering, shadowy trees. My phone had no signal, not even a single bar. The moment I stepped down, the bus pulled away, tires crunching against the gravel until the sound faded completely. I stood there, suitcase in hand, surrounded by the kind of silence that didn't feel natural. The air was thick, humid, yet cold enough to make my skin prickle. Every sound seemed sharper than it should have been: my footsteps, the faint rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird that I couldn't see. The trees on either side of the road bent inward slightly, making the path feel like it was closing in on me as I walked. Somewhere far ahead, I knew the inn was waiting. It was the only place I had been able to find when booking, hidden in this isolated corner of the countryside. After about 10 minutes of walking, I saw something by the side of the road. At first it just looked like a dark shape, partially covered by weeds. As I got closer, I realized it was an abandoned car. Its paint was stripped away in patches, exposing rust that had eaten deep into the metal. All the windows were shattered, glass scattered like dull gems in the dirt. The driver's side door hung open, creaking slightly with the wind. I stepped closer, curious but cautious. The inside was worse than the outside. The seats were torn, the dashboard smashed in, but the strangest thing was what sat in the driver's seat: a single shoe. It was caked in dried mud, the kind that looked almost black in the fading light. The shoe faced forward, positioned perfectly toward the steering wheel, as though someone had just stepped out moments before. There was no matching shoe anywhere in sight. I felt a chill that didn't come from the weather. Something about it seemed wrong. Not just that it was left behind, but the way it seemed almost placed, like whoever owned it had been interrupted mid-movement. I glanced back down the road I had come from, half expecting to see the bus still there, or someone walking in my direction. But the path was empty, the trees swaying gently, hiding whatever might be beyond them. The air grew heavier, pressing against my lungs, and I suddenly wanted to keep moving. I stepped away from the car and continued toward the inn, trying to shake the feeling that the shoe was somehow connected to me now, that I shouldn't have looked at it at all. My footsteps seemed to echo faintly, even though I knew they couldn't in open air. Every few steps I glanced over my shoulder, convinced that if I looked long enough, I'd see someone there. I never did, but the longer I walked, the more certain I became that the silence around me had changed, as if something else was now listening. The inn appeared at the end of the road like something that had been forgotten decades ago. Its roof sagged in the middle, and most of the paint had peeled away, revealing the weathered wood beneath. A crooked sign swung slowly in the breeze, the faded letters barely readable. This was supposed to be a warm, charming countryside lodge, at least according to the pictures online. But the building in front of me looked like it belonged in another time, one where people didn't return from their travels. As I stepped closer, I noticed that all the curtains in the windows were drawn tight, except for one on the top floor. The fabric there had been pushed aside slightly, just enough to leave a narrow gap. I couldn't see anyone inside, but the thought that someone could be watching made my skin crawl. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination after the long journey. But my pace quickened as I climbed the short set of wooden steps to the door. As soon as I pushed the door open, a smell hit me. It was faint but strange, a mix of damp wood and something metallic, like old coins left out in the rain. The floorboards creaked loudly under my feet, the sound echoing in the still air. Right in front of me was a small front desk, but no one was there. On the counter sat a single key, attached to a tag with my name written in faded ink. No welcome note, no check-in, just that lonely key waiting like it had been placed there hours before. I looked around the lobby. A few chairs were pushed against the walls, their cushions sagging. In the corner, a tall grandfather clock ticked softly, the sound too loud in the quiet room. I didn't feel like staying down here, so I took the key and headed toward the stairs. The hallway to the left led to them, each step creaking under my weight, sounding almost like whispers instead of wood. The stairs were steep, and when I grabbed the rail, my hand came away covered in dust, like no one had touched it in years. The second-floor hallway was dim, lit only by one weak bulb at the far end. My room was the third door on the right. The key was stiff in the lock, and the heavy door groaned as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was warmer, but it didn't feel welcoming. The room was small, just a bed, a wooden chair in the corner, and a big window looking out at the forest. The wallpaper was old and peeling in spots. I set my bag on the bed and went to the window. The forest stretched far into the distance, thick and dark even in daylight. A thin fog was starting to slide between the trees, moving like it was alive. That's when I saw the picture frame on the bedside table. It was the only decoration in the room. The black and white photo showed a family of 4 standing in front of this but all their faces had been scratched out, deep marks where their eyes and mouths should have been. The scratches were so violent they had cracked the glass in several places. I stared for a while, unsure if I should turn it face down. In the end, I left it alone. Something about it made me feel like I shouldn't touch it. As the light outside faded, I unpacked a few things, trying to make the room feel less empty. But no matter what I did, it felt like a place where people only stayed once. The bed was stiff, the sheets cold, and that same faint metallic smell from downstairs lingered in the air. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft ticking of the hall clock. That's when I heard a slow, dragging sound above me, like heavy furniture being pushed. But the inn didn't have a third floor. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the building sounded too intentional, like footsteps moving in unseen hallways. I kept replaying the dragging sound in my head. From outside I had seen that the roof sloped right over my room. There couldn't be anything above it, yet the sound had been real steady, deliberate. By midnight, the air felt suffocating. I needed to breathe something other than the stale metallic air. I got up, put on my jacket and headed downstairs. The light above my door buzzed faintly. The stairs groaned under each step, the sound echoing through the inn as if the building was listening. When I opened the front door, icy air rushed in so fast it stung my skin. The fog had returned, thicker than before, curling and shifting like it had a mind of its own. The road ahead was almost gone, swallowed in white. I told myself I'd only walk a short way. The gravel crunched loudly under my shoes, the sound too sharp in the emptiness. I could barely see more than a few steps ahead. Shapes of trees appeared and vanished in the fog, their tall, thin forms bending in the breeze. Then I heard footsteps. Soft, but clear. They matched my pace exactly. When I slowed, they slowed. When I stopped, they stopped. I turned quickly, peering into the fog, but nothing was there. The mist shifted lazily, revealing only the faint outline of the inn in the distance. My skin crawled. I kept walking, telling myself it was probably just the sound of my own steps bouncing back off the trees, but the illusion broke when I stopped again. The footsteps behind me took one more step after I had already gone still. The sound of it was wrong, too heavy, too close. A sudden coldness swept through me, the kind that feels like it starts in your spine. I turned again, slower this time, scanning every shadow in the mist. My eyes caught the faintest shift, like something moving deeper among the trees, but it was gone before I could focus on it. The fog seemed to swallow everything, keeping whatever it was hidden. My body screamed at me to go back. I turned and retraced my steps, walking faster now, almost a jog. The sound of my own breathing filled my ears, but underneath it, I could hear those other steps again only. Now they weren't keeping pace with me. They were following, getting closer. The porch light of the inn came into view through the fog, a weak yellow glow that felt impossibly far away. I pushed myself to move faster, nearly tripping over the uneven ground. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat loud in my ears. Finally, I reached the steps, gripping the railing as I pulled myself up. The moment I crossed the threshold into the lobby, the sound of footsteps stopped. I shut the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing hard. The inn was silent again, as if nothing had happened. But something in me knew I hadn't been alone out there. When I turned to go upstairs, I froze. The floor in front of the door was wet, small drops of water leading inside from the porch. I followed them with my eyes, my stomach tightening. The droplets formed a trail across the floor, stopping just a few feet from the staircase. It wasn't the water that made my breath catch. It was the marks beside it, fresh footprints in the dust, larger than mine, pointing toward the forest. There were 2 sets, one going out, one never coming back. The following day dragged by in a haze of unease. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined the footsteps, that the trail of wet prints had some harmless explanation, but every sound in the inn made my nerves tighten. The building groaned in the wind, the walls seemed to breathe in the silence, and I found myself avoiding the thought of stepping outside again. I stayed in my room, sitting by the window, watching the forest that stretched endlessly beyond the property. By late afternoon, the fog had lifted, but the forest still looked wrong. The trees stood unnaturally still, their shadows long and sharp against the fading light. I kept telling myself there was nothing to fear, it was just an unfamiliar place, quiet and remote. but the longer I stared, the more I felt like I was the one being observed. It was just before sunset when I saw a movement. At first it was barely noticeable, a faint shift between two dark trunks. I thought maybe it was an animal, but then it stopped completely, holding perfectly still in a way no animal would. The shape was tall, thin, almost unnaturally so. And though it was too far away to see clearly, I could feel its attention locked onto me. The forest swallowed most of the light as the sun dipped lower. The figure remained in the same spot, unmoving, as if it had been waiting for the darkness. My pulse quickened, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was facing my direction. The distance should have made it impossible to know where its gaze was, but some instinct told me it was fixed directly on my window. The light from the moon began to spill over the treetops, and the shadows shifted just enough for me to see more. Its head tilted slightly to one side, slow and deliberate, like it was studying me. There was something unnatural about the movement, too smooth, too controlled, like the joints didn't work the way they should. I tried to step back from the glass, but my legs felt stiff, my body unwilling to move until I knew it was gone. Then, without taking a step, the figure slid backward, retreating into the forest. It didn't turn, didn't sway, didn't make a single sound. It was as though the shadows themselves had pulled it in. Within seconds it vanished between the trees. My breath came in sharp bursts as I backed away from the window. Every part of me wanted to believe it had been a trick of the light, but I knew better. I had seen it clearly enough to know it wasn't an illusion. Something had been standing out there, and it had been watching me for a long time. That night, I didn't turn off the lights. The glow of the lamp cast weak yellow pools across the room, but they did little to push back the darkness. I sat up in bed, too tense to close my eyes for more than a few seconds at a time. The sounds of the inn seemed sharper in the dark, the creaks, the soft rustle of fabric from somewhere beyond my room, the faint ticking of the hall clock. Hours passed, and I kept thinking about that figure. Was it still in the forest, waiting for me to fall asleep, or had it already found another way to get closer? I kept staring at the door, half expecting the handle to turn. Sometime after midnight, I thought I saw movement again, but this time it was inside. The far corner of my room seemed to ripple in the shadows, like the air itself was bending. I stared without blinking, holding my breath. When I finally blinked, the shape was gone, or maybe it had never been there at all. I didn't move from the bed. My eyes turned to the window. The forest was now just a dark wall, and my own reflection stared back at me in the glass. But then, I saw something behind it, something tall, something tilting its head. When the first weak light of morning came, I felt like I had been awake for days. My body ached from lying stiff all night, eyes darting between the door and the window. The shadows in the corners had shifted, stretching and curling like they had been alive. I didn't want to stay another minute. The peace I had come here for was gone. Now, I only wanted to leave. I packed quickly, stuffing clothes into my bag without folding them. The room felt smaller than before, like the walls had moved closer during the night. The air was heavy, pressing on my chest, carrying that same strange metallic smell. I avoided looking at the bedside table where the scratched-out photograph still stood, leaning at an odd angle like someone had touched it while I slept. The hallway outside was silent. The single light bulb flickered before settling into a dim glow. I hurried toward the stairs, every creak of the wood sounding too loud. The lobby was empty, just as it had been when I arrived. The front desk was dusty, untouched. I dropped my room key on the counter without slowing down. The front door was heavier than I remembered. I twisted the handle and pulled hard, but it didn't move. I tried again, leaning my shoulder into it, but it was stuck like it had swollen shut from the damp. My heart started to race. I looked around for another way out, but there was none. No back door, no side door, not even an open window. Then I heard it. A faint sound behind me, like fabric brushing the floor, or slow footsteps. I froze. The sound stopped the moment I turned around. The room was still. I told myself it was just the old building settling, but my skin felt tight, my instincts screaming that something was wrong. I thought about dropping my bag so I could move faster, but when I lifted it, I noticed it felt heavier. I unzipped it, pushing my clothes aside, and my stomach dropped. Sitting at the bottom was the same mud-covered shoe I had seen in the abandoned car on the road. The shoe was still wet, the mud fresh, as if it had just been pulled from the ground. I stared at it, frozen. I hadn't touched that car. There was no way it could be here unless someone had put it in my bag while I slept, which meant someone had been in my room. The air shifted behind me, becoming warm, like someone was standing just close enough for their breath to touch the back of my neck. My skin prickled. I didn't want to turn around. The warmth grew stronger, like someone leaning in slowly. I pulled at the door with all my strength. The wood groaned but stayed shut. The air felt thick, muffling every sound except my heartbeat. Then, I felt it, a slow, steady exhale against my skin. I closed my eyes for just a moment, and in my mind I saw it clearly. The tall, thin figure from the forest, standing right behind me, head tilted. When I opened my eyes, the shoe in my bag was gone. The door swung open on its own. Outside, the road was empty, and the forest was still. But I couldn't make myself step outside. Something told me if I left now, it would follow. And deep down, I knew it already had.